All right, and welcome back to another episode of the Pearl Snap Tactical Podcast, a show that gives you the tips and tools you need to make yourself stronger, faster, and harder to kill. I'm joined with me, my special guest, Kris Maloney. We're going to talk about church security today. And so even obviously, if you're listening to this or watching it and you're on a team or you're thinking about getting on a team or standing one up in your church, this episode is going to be right up your alley. But even if you're not a churchgoer, I think you're still going to find value in this, because what Kris and I are going to talk about are security-based principles, and principles are universal. So it may look different in its application, but it's going to be pertinent to you regarding your personal security at work, at your home, or even just when you're out with your family. So I think there's going to be a lot of good conversation that comes out of this. So make sure you stick with us. So without further ado, Kris, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, man. Yeah, excited to have you here. So I've followed your stuff for quite a while and was just impressed with the kind of work and the things that you're doing. So I knew I had to get you on the show. So thanks for being here. So as we kick it off, just for those at home who haven't been exposed to your work, can you kind of give us your background and how you got involved doing what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm former military. I spent 21 years in the Army, most of that time actually as a reservist, but I did start out active duty. I served in Desert Storm, went on later, lucky enough to go back to Iraq for Iraqi freedom. So been to war 2 times. The whole time I was an MP, except towards the end of my military career, I transitioned to the dark side, if you will, and became an officer.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Made it up to E6, switched over to an officer. I retired as a captain of a logistics company.
Nice.
And so it was a fun ride.
Yeah.
I spent 18 years in law enforcement, a lot of that time down in Huntsville, Alabama, for anyone who might be down that way. I finished up here in Minnesota. Up here, I spent a lot of time in crime prevention, those kind of things. Mm-hmm. From there, I was a regular churchgoer. And while I was going to church and pretty much minding my own business, I was approached by the church leadership, and they asked me if I would help them because they felt like money was being stolen from a safe. Mm. And I said, yeah, absolutely. I'll help you out. And so we bought a new safe. We set up a whole new protocol around the use of the safe, access to the safe, and handling money and all that kind of stuff. And then after doing that, I went about my business, right? Just went on with life. Some time went by and they approached me again and they said, hey, we need you to, our insurance company is requiring us to have training for anybody who works with children. And I thought, okay, that'd be great. And so I put together all the training and I, got outside instructors come in. I create a whole protocol around working with kids and vetting volunteers and all that kind of stuff. And I went about my life again. Then finally, some more time went by and the leadership approached me again and said, hey, we want you to start a team. Mm. And so I put together my first safety team. It was a 2-campus church. With 2 services each, running a team of just under 20 people between the 2 campuses. And one of the things I realized, like many of your listeners probably realize, is people need training. And they need a lot of training.
Yeah.
And so the first thing I did is I put together an 8-hour academy, if you will. It was death by PowerPoint. I don't know how any of them survived, but I locked them into a room. And we did 8 hours in one day.
8-hour selection, man.
Yeah. And after it was all done, we just kept on operating. I made all the mistakes. And as time went on, it kind of just grew. I started helping more churches in the area. I started, shifted to an online academy. And I spent 12 years as a safety director at that church. And started helping other churches in 2014.
All right.
So if I do my math really quick, I guess,
Don't look for me for help.
yeah.
I can't even
10,
count on. I can't
10
even count
years
on my fingers.
yeah. So it's 10 years
Yeah.
of helping
Yeah.
churches around the nation. And
Nice.
I've trained something like over 7,000 people have gone through my
Wow.
training.
Yeah, that's a lot of experience. So yeah, well, I'm excited to have you here. So let's get into it. So, where to start? Just some of the things in your origin stories already, like stuff I wanted to seize on. But I think let's just kind of back up a little bit because I know, I'm down here in the South. I grew up in the Bible Belt. And, growing up even in the 80s and everything, just, as a kid, you don't think about security and things like that. But now that I look back on it and reflect, on my childhood, I mean, just the whole thought of a church needing security like that kind of, even in a modernist secular kind of society, just at that time, at least to me, it just seemed like churches were kind of off limits for the most part.
Yeah.
And but that's not true these days, is it?
No, it's really not. I'm with you, kind of a kid of the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you would never think for a minute that anything, like when I was a teenager, I was up to no good quite a bit.
Yeah.
But one of the things I remember is the churches were unlocked.
Mm.
And it never occurred to us to go into a church and do something disrespectful to the church.
Yeah.
That's just the way it was.
Yeah.
And but I think one of the things that's happened is in society, churches used to be very much favored.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a certain privilege and a certain respect that went along with it.
Yeah.
However, some things happened, right? I mean, we had, certainly some bad things happening in the Catholic Church, right, that have made the news and continues to make the news. Protestants have had their run at it too, with the Jimmy Baker and Jimmy Stewart. And I don't know how many Jimmys there were, but there were quite a few bad ones out there.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And what happened is not only those kind of events, but with that, politicians, public leaders, community leaders have become more and more emboldened, if you will, to talk against the church, which was not a thing back in the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And with that language, it kind of opened the church up to be free, free. How do I want to say that? It's a target now.
Yeah. I think too, even if you go back 30 years, 40 years, I mean, especially the further you go, I mean, even if you weren't a member or you didn't attend a church on a regular basis, at least in small town America, I mean, the church was still part of it was the glue to the community still. There were still functions, big, events that were held at church. I don't know. It just seemed like churches served as a glue. And now that just doesn't seem, I mean, I'm sure in small towns it's still like that to a certain extent, but you see what I'm saying? I think there's part of that too. It's just kind of an unraveling of society as a whole. I don't think the church is alone in that. I think there's other, even just civic institutions that used to be kind of the glue that people respected and people looked to, even if they didn't find themselves participants in it, but there was at least that respect and that kind of, I don't know, I guess I keep coming to that word glue that it's just not there anymore. Not saying that churches don't do good, that they don't have good relations with their community, but I don't think anybody would argue that it's just not the same as it was 50 years ago,
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Yeah, there's something that's been eroded in many communities, and how churches interact with their communities has become increasingly difficult for them. Despite their best efforts, they kind of meet walls and stuff like that. Yeah. And that's essentially, like I said, politicians, community leaders are more, feel more free to just kind of push back and say, well, that's very nice, Pastor, that you want to do this. But we're not going to, participate in that.
So something that's kind of interesting, I want to get your take on this. So I do a little bit of church security training with my company, not as much as you do, but one thing I did notice, and I started our training company, Preparedness, was started around like 2013, 2014, about the same time you kind of getting started as well. And as I was doing, I just remember at that time, I mean, it seems like ages ago, but it really wasn't that long ago, that when it came to church security, we still really hadn't turned a corner. It seemed like any churches or anyone that would approach me that says, hey, we need to get some help at our church, it just seemed like, regardless of denomination, they were either in one or two camps. It was a camp of, yeah, we wish we didn't have to have this, but we see the need and we're 100% behind it. We're going to stand up and we want a robust safety team. And then you had the others of, absolutely not. I don't want to talk about it. We're going by faith or whatever. It was non-negotiable. But then that was 10 years ago. But I would say within the last few years, especially with some of the shootings and high, I guess, infamous incidences that have happened, I'm not saying that every church has a team or they're planning on it, but nobody looks at you like you're crazy anymore. I find that, I mean, do you see that too? Like everyone has come to they can at least respect the idea, even if they don't, and a lot of churches don't have it. They don't participate in having a safety team, but they don't look at you like you're a heretic for broaching the subject. Do you find that too?
It's getting better,
Yeah.
but I still think there's a lot of that. Certainly there are churches that are like safety team. Mm-hmm. Excellent. Let's do it. Let's put it together. Let's go. But there are still plenty of churches out there that you say safety team or security team, mm-hmm. and they do accuse you of that they look at you like you're a heretic. Yeah. Something is wrong with you.
Yeah.
God protects us and all those kind of things come out. And then the other thing is, of course, is a lot of times when people talk about church security, the first place their brain goes to is the presence of firearms. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so then, of course, then the battle lines are drawn as they already are, right? You have the ones for firearms and you have those mm-hmm. against firearms. Yeah. And so if you're talking against firearms and you say, hey, we need to start a safety team, their first thought is guns. And therefore it's like, no. Yeah. But I think the conversation, I think people are waking up, even those people are waking up to the idea that safety or for churches is more than just firearms.
Yes.
It's about fire. It's about severe weather. It's about child protection. My goodness, child protection. Mm-hmm. It's mm-hmm. about being ready for people with mental illness. It's about being ready for a potential domestic or child custody issue, mm-hmm. working itself out in the middle of the church, in the middle, Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's so much more than the gun.
Right. Yeah. And it's, I'm glad you bring that up because there's so many ways to approach that. But let's just go ahead and get the active shooter part. Let's go ahead and approach that first because, I look at other companies and, everyone has their marketing strategy, right? But one common motif you see when it comes to someone's putting on a church security seminar or something like that, it's always geared around a violent shooter from the outside coming in to blow the place up, right? I mean, and obviously we know from stories in the news that happens. It can happen and no one's immune from it. But statistically speaking, I mean, is that the biggest threat that churches face right now here at least in America?
For active shooters and it being an outside shooter?
Or just that threat in general? Is that the biggest risk that churches
No, I wouldn't say it's the biggest risk. It's still something that we definitely have to focus on. Mm-hmm. It's your basic risk assessment, right? What's mm-hmm. the probability of an incident occurring? And then what's the severity of if it does occur?
Yeah.
Well, certainly when it comes to active shooter, the probability is really low. Mm-hmm. However, the severity is the loss to life.
Yeah.
So now think about Sutherland Springs,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
26 people being killed as, it was essentially domestic violence, but that's, a story that probably some people already know. But if it happens, it costs big, doesn't it?
Yeah. Right.
When you talk about a pastor being killed, not that pastors' lives are somehow more important than anyone else's, but the existence of a church is reliant oftentimes on whoever the pastor is.
Mm-hmm.
And so you take out that pastor, you taken out that church.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's more than just, we need to get a new pastor. And I don't mean to sound crass about it, but it's the psychological impact. Your people, if they witness that and they see that, the trauma that can happen to your congregation. I mean, you might very well, that could certainly have the potential to just shut the church down completely, because not in the sense that the government's going to get involved and do it, but just the fact that people don't feel safe there. They don't want to come back to that same place each Sunday and be reminded of what they watch. So they may choose to go somewhere else. I mean, so I see what you're saying. It may be low probability, but it's very high consequence if it happens. So it has to be addressed. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's one thing I do tend to talk to church folks about. I mean, in the trainings that we've done, I mean, obviously active shooter gets addressed. But, when I talk to people, I say, well, if this is statistically speaking, the lower probability of things that can happen to you, and that's what everyone is hyper focused on, well, think about what are all the other risks that you're more likely to face that you're not even paying attention to, right? So what are some of those threats and risks that people may not even be, their head's not even focused on that?
Yeah, so of course, property crimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Property crimes. Things get stolen from church.
Yeah.
Don't leave your cell phone unattended.
Yeah.
Don't leave your stuff unattended. And of course, depending on church, sometimes I visit churches and I see purses laying everywhere. I see computers and cell phones and all kinds of stuff just laying around. And it's just like, there's thefts that are going on. Vandalism. I mean, come on, vandalism going on at churches now is just through the roof. Right. It's really increasing. I kind of look at vandalism as kind of the canary in the coal mine. And that's the first thing you start to see. And the vandalisms at churches have skyrocketed. Arson has increased quite a bit. And so, it's property crimes, arson, of course, being one of those things. Stolen vehicles. Isn't that weird? But it makes sense if you think about it.
Yeah.
Because all of our cars are parked in the parking lot in large numbers. And then one of two things is going to happen. One, you have car shoppers. I don't know if you've heard of this. Basically, it tends to be kids, but they just pull on every single door.
Yeah.
And if a door opens, they climb in, they steal change, they steal your radar detector, your cell phone charger, whatever they can get a hold of, they steal it out of it.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is it's a great place. So there's certain cars that are extremely easy to break into. We've seen them on the news and that kind of stuff. And where's a great place to go look for that car? At the church on Sunday. Yeah. And the hours are posted right on the sign. Yeah. So between 9 and 11:30, we can walk through this parking lot and do whatever we want, and we don't have to worry until we get close to the end that we got to get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what are some, so we talked about, property crime. That's a big one. Theft. That's a big one. You mentioned domestic things. I think that is something that would really surprise people. It's been a while since I've looked at the statistics, but going back to the active shooter thing, I think in most people's minds, or at least a lot of the people I've talked to before, the scenario most people will conjure is someone who's mad, someone who's unhinged, someone who's probably not even associated with the church, but picks and fixates on this particular church for some reason, and then comes and commits this act of violence. But statistically speaking, a lot of the incidences are actually caused by people who are either from the church or connected to it, and maybe through a family member. Is that true? And can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Most attacks at churches are by its members, its regular attendees, or somebody that's related or directly related to somebody that goes to the church on the regular basis. Domestic violence. That's one of the number one reasons a shooting happens at a church.
Mm-hmm.
It's the estranged husband or wife that knows they're going to find the other one at the church, on Sundays and what time they're going to be there. And depending, they might even know where they tend to sit.
Yeah.
And all that other kind of stuff. So you got domestic violence situations. You have child custody issues. We know that tempers really go off the rails when we're talking about child custody, but that's a big cause of it. Mental illness. I have no idea what we started putting in the water in the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
But mental illness seems to be going through the roof. And so so that's the kind of issues also we're seeing where they come in, they create a disturbance. They might be physically violent, maybe not to the point of shooting, but that could be up to that level. So domestic violence, mental illness, addiction. So alcohol and drug addiction play into the violence that occurs at church. It's going to be somebody
Yeah. And it always gets back to that place of, when we talk about an incident, we kind of always, and I do this too, your worst case scenario, so obviously it's someone shoots the place up or does something, but statistically speaking, it could be a lot lower intensity, but still cause problems, a domestic disturbance where it's just it could be a verbal altercation out in your parking lot. But if that thing, church is letting out and you've got your whole crowd like going out to their cars, and now you've got this couple that's just going at it after each other, even verbally, that can cause that it's unsettling for people. And I think that's one of the hardest things to kind of try to get across about the need to have some type of safety, some type of people that can interdict in a meaningful way, because your parishioners or congregants, they see that. And when they're uneasy, it causes second and third order effects. I mean, would you agree? What do you think of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Clearly, even if it just turns out to be a disturbance, right? Your example was there out in the parking lot. And in my mind, I go, if only. These are happening in the bathroom. This is happening in the lobby. This is happening at the door leading into the children's ministry. This is happening even barking at each other in the middle of a sermon. It's, the common, I hate to say it this way, but I think it's partly true. It's the common decency of public behavior seems to have gone right out the window. Your Karens and Kyles now, they will stand up in front of God and everybody and just scream and yell and swear and they don't care where they're at.
Yeah. And it does seem, hard for some people to get wrapped around, especially, maybe not so much if you go to a mega church where there's thousands of people there, most that you don't really know, versus a small church that's got less than 100 people. But it can happen in the small churches too, right? I mean,
yeah, it comes down to the fact that, we're all people and people struggle with life. People lose jobs, they develop medical conditions, they lose family members, they might be dealing with their own depression or mental health issues, or maybe even addiction. All these happen in a church of 20 people and churches of 20,000 people. And so, we can't, once again, I hate to point to Sutherland Springs now twice, but think about that. That's a super small community.
Yeah.
Their average attendance, I think, was about 50 people.
Yeah.
So,
And there was, man, I wish I can't pull it up, but maybe I'll stick the story in the show notes. But an example I used is there was a church up in the Northeast that I think is a Presbyterian church that had been in that community for over 100 years. So well established, very much a part of the community. And there was a a husband that came in and shot his wife, who was, I guess, the organ player or something like that, like during the service. And it was like small church, had been around, and and it kind of goes to that normalcy bias. It hasn't happened in the past, it's not going to happen in the future, not here. That's something that happens at other places, but it does, it can, and so that's why this is such an important topic. So let's talk about, for churches, because I want to give a little bit for people who already have teams and are just kind of looking to make sure they're not missing anything. But let's start with the basics for folks who are just standing up a team. Obviously, like you said, they got to get some training. It's always better not to reinvent the wheel, but before they get there and they're just kind of starting out, from an exploratory perspective, what are some big ticket items that you kind of urge people to kind of make sure they start covering first?
Are you talking about what kind of risks they should plan for first, or are you talking about like the initial steps of starting the safety ministry?
Well, let's do both. Let's start with like kind of some of the big ticket item risks, and then move into like team onboarding.
Yeah, so the primary risks actually start, I would say they start with child protection, and they start with, well, just like that. So child protection, number one, right? We know this. Churches are being sued out of existence because of because of a child being harmed by somebody at the church, or somebody who gained access to the child because of the church. So it's not like a lot of these cases, it's not like the abuse occurred in the building.
Right.
It's what it is they're part of a children's ministry, and this ministry leader has access to the child.
Yeah.
And that access is occurring outside of church property. And so, there's that. The other thing I think we have to plan for is medical. So my statement is look across your congregation. The more gray hair you see and round bellies, the more likely it is you're going to have a medical.
Yeah.
And just like active shooter, we're talking about life and death situations here. And so if you think active shooter is important, then you have to also think that medical is important, and medical is going to happen a whole lot more often than the active shooter. And so let's do medical, let's do child protection on the front end. Now, to be absolutely clear, I'll say another one, and that is, even though it's extremely low, is fire. And let me give you my justification for this. A lot of times when you're introducing a new ministry to the church, you're going to have some people push back. They're not going to like it. And so what I recommend often is this: let's start small with a program that people will buy into. And you know what program nobody is ever against is fire safety.
Yeah.
Could you imagine somebody in a board meeting saying, no, fire safety at the church is a bad idea. Yeah. Doing fire evacuation drills for the children is a bad idea. Of course not.
Yeah.
And so for a lot of churches, if you start with that program, you get a lot of buy-in. The parents love you. The church loves you. Yeah. You demonstrate competency. You demonstrate your willingness to work on something and work on it to the end. Yeah. And so do the fire evacuation, but then medical obviously is in there as well. And then of course, child protection cannot and should not ever be ignored.
Yeah. And I would say, I can't imagine in this day and age a church not having some kind of protocol, from your smallest church to your largest ones. Your larger ones being, they have a bigger budget. So there's, actually key fobs that parents check their kids in, and, I've seen them spit out a tag with their picture on it that they stick on the kid, all that kind of stuff. And there's, you show your receipt or whatever when you pick up your child at the end, and I think everyone, or some people may be tempted to say, oh, well, yeah, we already have that. But I think one thing that, and you can kind of tell me what you think about this, is something that's so important. It's like, yeah, but that's when everything's going right. What if something goes wrong? Like, and making sure that everybody's on the same page, and the need to have it on paper so that, when you're not there because you're going on vacation and someone's, filling your spot, that it's going to be done the same way. And, what happens when you've got a couple who's estranged from each other, and the guy, we'll just pick on the guy doesn't go to church there, but the mother does. And so it's not his visitation weekend, but he's coming there to pick up his child, and he's not going to take no for the answer. Well, now what? Now what do you do when someone's causing a scene? It hasn't escalated to violence yet, but how do you keep it from going there? And those are some things that I think people that need to continually follow through, and not just be like, oh yeah, we have this check-in procedure, so we'll check that box. That you need to be thinking 2 or 3 steps and wargaming it out, so to speak. I mean, what do you think of that?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. That's a perfect example. Is we got a check-in, check-out procedure, and we get a little sticker that they print off, and you slam one sticker on the back of the kid with their name and the little code on it, and then the mom or dad gets one too. Yeah. And then when they go get the kid, they have to present that ticket to get their kid out. And they say, great, we got it covered. But what they don't cover is this. What happens if the person doesn't have a ticket? Mm-hmm. What happens if dad does show up and they have, as far as you could tell, legal custody? Can dad get the kids? Yeah. What if there's something going on? There's already some papers being drawn up by the court. Then what? Yeah. And so that's why it's so important to, like you said, we got to kind of game these out a little bit. We got to plan about, okay, we've done this thing, but now what's likely to go wrong? And for safety teams, we're thinking about the disturbance. Now dad is screaming, give me my kid. And you got some poor volunteer, childcare volunteer being screamed at. And they're just like, I don't know what to do. I've never had a problem before. Yeah. And so the safety team needs to be trained to come in to assist that poor volunteer. Yeah. And then be able to use de-escalation techniques, enforce the policy, enforce the system, and be skilled and prepared for that kind of confrontation. Yeah,
for sure. For sure. All right. So we've kind of hit those, and we've talked about active shooter and all that kind of stuff. So let's talk about staffing the team. What are some big challenges that people that you've worked with before that they come across when they're trying to recruit and to get the right people in those slots?
Yeah. So there's a couple cautions, certainly, well, let's just go over a vetting process real quick. So obviously this is not like any other ministry in the church. Right? This is not being an usher. This is not a door greeter. I would say it's of greater demand than the children's ministry, volunteers in the children's ministry. It's definitely requires a system. So we should definitely have an application. And part of that application has references that we're going to check. So let's talk about reference. I'm getting ahead of myself, but let's do it anyway. References. I don't want the pastor's name. I don't want the name of the men's ministry leader. I don't want the name of anybody in church. I want your boss's name. I want your neighbor's name and anyone outside the church, because anyone can pretend to be a decent person for an hour and a half on Sunday. Yeah. Yeah. I want to know what kind of person you are when the rest of the week.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. That's a good point.
So we have an application. We have references. We're checking those references. And I mean, we're not, isn't that neat? No, we're calling these people. We're making contact with them, and we're keeping records on that. Then we're going to, we need to have an interview with them. It can be informal, but we need to talk to them and find out what kind of person they are. Yeah. And then, of course, background check and maybe even a second interview, depending on the size and complexity of your team, or this individual you might want to say, let's talk with him again because I think he's a little weird or whatnot. I don't know. Yeah. One of the things we have to look out for is what I'm going to call a tackleberry. So old Police Academy movie reference. Yeah. But there are a lot of people in this space that are way too enthusiastic about being involved in a life and death situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
To me, that's a warning sign.
Yep.
That's a warning sign. And so those are the kind of people who say, hey, thank you so much, but, no, thank you.
Yeah, I have come across that in groups and teams that I've worked with when they're onboarding people or trying to recruit, and it's just really, I don't know what it is, but it's really interesting that you've got, and this obviously this isn't everybody, but it happens enough that I'll bring it up, right? That they put out the announcement, they put out the feelers, hey, we may be fielding this team. And now you've got people who haven't been, I mean, they may be coming to the church, but they're not active in other ministries. They're not contributing in other areas. And then on the outside, and not that this is required, but weren't in the military, weren't in law enforcement, may not even have a concealed carry holster, don't train on their own on the regular, but then all of a sudden the thought that they might be able to carry a gun, in some type of official capacity, all of a sudden it's like there's I don't know. It's almost reminiscent of those old Christmas shopping stories when the baby Elmo comes out and people are like crashing the door down, to get in. It's like you got more people than you're turning away people. But have you seen that? Has that come up some?
Yeah, I think people like the idea of, finally I can volunteer for something I believe in. Now, this is part of it that I don't have a problem with.
Right.
There are people like myself. I was never going to work with the children's ministry. The children do not deserve that. I could pull off usher. I could less likely pull off greeter, though I could pull that off. Definitely, you don't want to hear me sing. I'm not part of the choir.
Yeah.
But being a sheepdog at heart, if you will, being a protector at heart, a soldier, a cop is my profession. I have a certain attitude and perspective of things. And for the church to suddenly say, hey, we now are putting together a safety team, and among their responsibilities is to protect the congregation. You're going to have a lot of people go, ooh,
yeah,
that's me. I want to be part of that. Finally, a way I can serve the church that fits my personality and needs. Now, when it comes to their background, with a good background, bad background, whatever, or no background, I'm kind of, to some extent, I'm okay with that. And the reason I'm okay with that is this: if I love a blank slate, if I can train you, then I can make you into the type of safety team member our church needs. Now, I do prefer if they have already done quite a bit of firearms training, if we're talking about a church that uses firearms. Because you and I both know, taking a guy up to the range one time, teaching him how to shoot, and then, maybe even teaching him well enough so he could kind of pass a qualification test. It takes thousands and thousands and thousands of rounds, hours and hours at the range that, quite frankly, we're not going to have time to do.
Right.
But everything else, hey, you're a gun guy, and but you don't know nothing else. Awesome.
Yeah.
I'll take you in a heartbeat.
Yeah. Yeah. Provided there's some kind of training program or some way. I've seen it that too. And I didn't mean to say that you have to be a cop or have to have military, because I do know some folks that, are dentists or bankers, and they're some of the best I've ever seen. You know what I mean? Because some people take to this very well, and so and in fact, well, here I'll give you another for instance. Sometimes it could be, I have seen where having a background like that can be a detriment, and it really comes down to not the training and background, but to the personality, right? So, I was. This had nothing to do with a church training thing, but I was up in Kansas City and I was doing a terrorism brief for law enforcement. And over the break, I got to talking to one of the cops, and I still keep in contact with him. He's a buddy, super good dude, but so I won't use his name, but he's he, as many police officers do for bigger churches, they kind of moonlight and they'll get hired on as security. So he didn't go to church there. He didn't have a connection there other than being a police officer in that community. And then, on Sundays for extra money, he was, part of the security apparatus, right? So anyway, I guess evidently there was a guy that was kind of a nuisance. He wasn't really part of the church, but he just was coming around and making people feel uneasy and just kind of causing a problem. Nothing overt, but it was just making people uncomfortable. And he was telling me about this story, and he was just like, yeah, so I ran him off. And I was like, oh, you ran him off? He goes, yeah, I just ran him off. I was like, how'd you do that? He goes, I was just mean to him. And I was like, I did, I'm not there to, we're doing a different class, it's not a church training class. So I just was like, oh, okay, well, that's one way of doing it. But, I thought when I was driving back home, I was like, I wonder if the leadership there even knew that had happened. And I wonder how they felt about that. Because I think a lot of times with some of these churches, like their default and their only security team is just hiring police officers. And they think, well, we'll just hire these guys and then we got it taken care of. And that's that is better than nothing. But you can't always, even those law enforcement officers, I think, need to be trained in the sense of this is the kind of church we are. This is how we want things handled. Other than if someone's breaking the law, then, you're acting in your official capacity. But, we have a public image we want to uphold. We are doing outreach to the community. And, if you handle it that way, that might be at cross purposes with our mission,
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's interesting. Yeah, there's so many, I think. And it even opened my eyes when I started getting into it. It's a lot bigger than you think, when you first come into this, that not to overwhelm people, but the whole matter of if you want to do it right and have a good, robust program, that it's a lot bigger than just having a couple people watching the aisles, watching the doors, and, making sure we've got some lockdown procedures. There's a lot more that goes into it than just that, which goes back to why people really need to have some kind of training, I think.
Yeah, they most definitely have to have some training. And you're right, the world is very big. Yeah. In fact, often when I'm dealing with a brand new team leader or a brand new safety director, and they're trying to get something going and set it all up, I'll tell them kind of what I've already said. Start with one program.
Yeah.
Just do that one thing. May it be fire or medical. Do that one thing and do it with excellence. Mm-hmm. And then move on to the next one.
Yeah.
Because if you try to have everything on day one, mm-hmm. your head will explode.
Yeah.
The other thing I tell them is this. If you worked 40 hours a week on being the safety director at your church, doing nothing for 40 hours a week, you're doing nothing but developing your ministry and developing the team and preparing the church and all that kind of stuff. And you do that 40 hours a week. In 3 to 5 years, you'll have the team you always wanted. And I say that tongue in cheek, but you know what? Yeah. That's absolutely true.
Yeah. It is. And so, for people that are just kind of doing it out of the goodness, out of the love from their heart, that, it is really important not to get overwhelmed and just to take it one piece at a time. Because if you try to do it all, in 1 week, you're just going to burn out. I've seen that. I've seen leaders burn out on that, or you're just going to implode because it's just too big. Even at a small church, there's just so much stuff to do. What are some, all right. So we talked about like some big ticket threats, and we could, each of those could be their own podcast episode. They really could, but we're just trying to kind of give a 30,000 foot view. But so I want to go back to, you brought up Officer Tackleberry, right, from the Police Academy movies, so that is a challenge, right? So how do I want to ask this? It's like, okay, so we're trying to recruit and we're trying to get the right people on there. So how do we avoid getting the Officer Tackleberries on the team and getting the right people there? What are some trapdoors you've seen people fall through that maybe the rest of us could learn from?
I think a lot of people make the mistake I made when I first started my team. And I was so desperate for bodies. I said, anyone want to be part of the team? And anyone who raised their hand was part of the team.
Yeah.
And so there was no vetting process at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then I drag them into church on a Saturday for an 8-hour academy. And then I was doing a little bit of on-the-job training, so
Mm-hmm.
I was there basically every single Sunday and trying my best to guide them and teach them and,
Mm-hmm.
The on-the-job training, if you will. And that's the way I did everything wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to a point where I had this married couple, the sweetest couple in the whole world, just great people, good attitude. They volunteered all the time. They came when they are on the schedule, they came and all that good stuff. But you know what? They just didn't have, the cops and maybe soldiers out there are going to understand what I'm saying here. They didn't have that thing.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have that X factor. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't have that copness in them.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have that killer instinct in them. I just knew that if something happened, that they
Mm-hmm.
were going to curl up into a ball
Mm-hmm.
and hide.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even about a violent intruder
Right.
thing. I think if somebody yelled at them,
Mm-hmm.
we would have had a problem.
Yeah.
They just didn't have what it takes. And I can tell you from experience, there is nothing stranger, there's nothing more awkward than firing a volunteer.
Yeah. Yeah.
But once you do fire a volunteer, you figure out real fast that you need a good vetting process and you need to watch for, certain types of people, going
Mm-hmm.
back to the Tackleberry thing.
Mm-hmm.
See, the problem with Tackleberry, the modern day Tackleberry, or maybe the good thing about the modern day Tackleberry, is they have no filter about being a Tackleberry.
Yeah.
And so for me, I tell people all the time, make friends with them on Facebook and look at everything they wrote.
Yeah.
Go back through their history because they're going to tell them on themselves. And it's not only important for us to know what kind of person they are, but think about that. Isn't that what the attorney's going to do?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
The attorney's going to climb through your social history back 100 years if it takes that to find something to show that you were a violent person, right? That's the way they're going to put it.
Yeah.
You're a person of violence.
Yeah.
You're a person of hate and anger. You said this one thing this one time to this one person, and that makes you, a racist, or it makes you a sexist, or it makes you a whateverist.
Yeah.
And that set you up for killing my client or shooting my client or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they will. They will. I've seen that. Yeah. And so that gets to the question of, what does a lot of these teams look like? It's like, it's the team you want versus the team you got. I think all of us that are, fielding teams would like dudes in their mid 30s that are strong, have commanding presence and, are nuanced in the soft and hard skills, but that's really not who we're getting most of the time, is it?
No, typically what you're going to get in safety teams are the ones I have been exposed to, which is hundreds and hundreds of them. They're typically made up of retirees, followed by empty nesters. Their kids, their kids are, in high school, senior, that kind of stuff, and or going off to college. And they're going to be, quite frankly, they're going to be your most dedicated safety team members. They're going to be the ones that show up and volunteer for things, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Then below that, you kind of get into the parents. And they become interested in it because they have kids that go to that church. And so they're raising their hands. However, they're less reliable typically. This is generalization. They're less reliable because they got soccer and dance and the play. And, they have all these things that they're chasing around with their kids, not to mention they have full-time jobs and marriages to maintain. And so sometimes, they're pretty much running on empty all the time. They're just exhausted. So they're good to have on the teams to get them trained and to use them, once or twice a month if you're lucky. But they're not going to be your high-capacity volunteers.
Yeah. I would say, based on my experience, I would say that rings true. I mean, it's most of the team is made up of and I say this lovingly, blue hairs, you know what I mean? They're older, they're retirees, just like you said, but what they may not bring as far as physicality, which you hope you never have to utilize, but we're also talking about the possibility of violence sometimes. So you need to have some kind of muscle, even if it's you're hiring a police officer or you have an officer in your congregation that's willing to do it, which, by the way, not all of them are. A lot of them, they're working their shifts, patrolling, dealing with the dregs of humanity all through the week. And the last thing they want to do on a Sunday is come to church and have to deal with it. I mean, I've seen that, but there's all kinds of positions and things like that don't require a physicality, right, to your team.
Yeah, absolutely. The truth of the matter is is when we talk about violent intruder and, the chance of that being deadly force or less lethal force, yes, that's something where you want the physicality. You want those shooting skills. You want all those kind of things that kind of push us towards, hey, we want operators, right? We want, that's the kind of ideal person. But everything else doesn't require that.
Yeah.
So eyes and ears in the parking lot and around the building, responding to medicals, to dealing with child issues, for verbal de-escalation. I spent 18 years in law enforcement working in a pretty busy side of town, the north side of Huntsville, Alabama. You could all look it up. And the thing is I used verbal de-escalation every single day, multiple times, on and on and on. Went hands-on much, much less than that. Yeah. And I never shot anyone.
Yeah.
And that's a dangerous side of town.
Yeah.
And maybe I was lucky for that, but you get my point. So now here's, you got the safety team. Karen being all upset about the cold hot dog on Wednesday evening, that's a verbal de-escalation scenario.
Yeah.
And you could be 90 years old. If you can talk, you can learn verbal de-escalation and handle that issue. Medicals. Okay, medical could be a little bit more physical. If you've ever done CPR, that'll kill you in no time. But still, once again, everything else fits the retirees, the empty nesters, and mom and dad.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, one of the white hot security personnel I ever knew was a I don't even know how old she was, but she's a grandma. And you want to talk about, she had the sharpest pair of eyes. And I don't mean to be able to see things at a long way, but I mean her awareness. And she would just sit in the lobby and with her little knitting, kit or whatever, acting like she was just knitting and but she wasn't. She was observing, and she would catch all kinds of things. And, and what I tell teams, it's like, you don't have to sit there and analyze everything. If something sends the hairs up on the back of your neck, or just something doesn't look right, you don't have to justify that. You can just articulate that to your security personnel, or communicate that to hire and say, hey, there's something, may not be anything, but we need somebody to come check this out. Here's what I got. You know what I mean? And she was always just seeing things, and they were legit things. I mean, it wasn't, you know what I mean? So I would say, that don't judge a book by its cover. I mean, in fact, she was such an asset because she was so unassuming that nobody paid attention to her, but she saw everything. And so you could really leverage, there's all kinds of skills apart from just the hard skills that are so crucial that you can leverage, and you'd be surprised, at the talent, for lack of a better word, that's out there in your congregation that you can use,
Yeah, a good leader is going to know their team members and what their talents and skills are, and then deploy them accordingly.
Yeah.
I had a guy on my safety team, kind of like your grandma. He was in a wheelchair. Now, is he going to engage anything?
Right.
No.
Right.
But he'll sit in the lobby watching people approaching the front doors, coming in the front doors, watching their interactions with each other, detecting if there is an argument between mom and dad. And, maybe it's nothing, and oftentimes it's not. But still, he's watching, he's observing, and he's got a radio.
Yeah.
I had a person on my team that was, I don't want to be, he was very heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, he had bad knees.
Mm-hmm.
Now, but what his positive was this, is every single month without fail, he checked all my fire extinguishers.
Mm-hmm.
He checked all my emergency lights. All my emergency signs. And he was always eyes and ears and on comms.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. I know what he is. I know what he could do.
Yeah.
Had an older lady. I'm pretty sure she had some breathing restrictions,
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes you'd wear the oxygen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what's a good job for her? She had no problem and enjoyed sitting at the cameras, watching monitors.
Yep.
So a lot of times it's like we can take people with limitations and challenges. And if you have a little creativity, a little common sense, and you're a good leader, you can redirect them towards a position, a job in which they would be good at.
Yeah. I think that's what it comes down to, is like being a good leader and having an open mind and, making do. I mean, there's usually a place that you can fit somebody. But let me ask you this. So this is something that I've come across for smaller congregations, like smaller churches. They look at those big mega churches that, they got all this money, they've got all this budget and all this, and we can't afford all of that. We can't afford to have a team. What would you say to that, to churches with smaller resources?
Yeah. So the idea then is, quite honestly, without taking away anything from the small churches, all churches struggle with resources.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have a church of 1,000 people, you need to have more safety team members, which means more training and more equipment. Versus you got 2 guys, right? Part of a church of 100 people that are part of the safety team. Now you're only training 2 guys and buying radios for 2 guys, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I would say this, what a lot of people don't realize is how a little bit of effort goes such a long way.
Mm-hmm.
If every church across the country would do one thing, and this one thing only, and that would be have a volunteer or 2 that are in charge of or have the responsibility to patrol the campus, to patrol the church before, during, and after the services.
Mm-hmm.
And you give them 2 instructions and 2 instructions only. 1, if you see anything suspicious, call the police. If there's an emergency, call the police, call 911. Number 2, your second instruction is this: don't do anything you haven't been trained to do.
Yeah.
If churches across the country did that, do you realize how much safer our churches would be? Mm-hmm. Just because somebody is looking for suspicion.
Yeah.
Somebody is waiting for the emergency to happen, and then they're already in their mind is, my job is to grab my phone, unlock it, 911, and we need police here. As simple as that. That would change everything. Did you hear about that story in Tennessee? It was an Easter service. 12 or 13-year-old boy went to the bathroom. Unfortunately for this young man, a creeper, a bad guy, came into the church unopposed, walked around the lobby, went into the bathroom, and waited for a victim. That's when this young man went in there. The man assaulted him, raped him, and drug him into a stairwell and left him in the stairwell. The kid was not discovered for 2 hours.
Ugh.
Okay? So if the church was being patrolled by somebody with only those 2 instructions, you see something suspicious, call the police, or an emergency, call the police, and don't do anything you're trained. 1 of 2 things would happen, right? They would have saw this guy come in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now maybe at that church, no big deal. Somebody's come in, the church is open, they go to the bathroom, no big deal, right? But then he's in there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes. Okay, this ain't right. And or in that time, the little boy goes in there.
Yeah.
Right? So now it's like, maybe I should go in there and wash my hands.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that would have been prevented or stopped or whatever. Or at least if we're patrolling the grounds, it would have been less than 2 hours before they wandered through that stairwell because they're actively patrolling the facilities. And he
Yeah.
would have been discovered earlier, getting medical attention earlier and all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so, quite frankly, most churches, I mean, to use Cooper's color code of awareness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most churches are at condition white.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're completely turned off. They're unaware. They're not paying attention. They're under the impression that the church is the safest place on earth and nothing bad will ever happen here.
Yeah.
And they trust that, and they believe in it so much that they will let their very young kids go to the bathroom by themselves. And 12, let's be honest, 12 is not even that young.
Yeah.
But how many of us standing in the church lobby have noticed an 8-year-old
Mm-hmm.
go to the
around.
bathroom on their own?
Yeah.
And we're going, I'm not entirely sure that's the wisest thing in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I would, and I know you were keeping those two like kind of directives just to show like at a minimum, but I would add, and it's really, what we call in the Army an implied task, right? So your task was something, hey, watch for this, be observant. But the implied task is, I always tell people, is look for work. So doing any type of security job can be tedious. Hopefully it's boring, because you don't want something to happen. And so your mind can wander, and it can cause you to maybe miss out on seeing things like that. Like you said, you notice, hey, that guy's been in there for 5 minutes. Oh, now this little kid, you kind of get a glazed look over your eye because you just been standing there for 30 minutes and nothing's going on. But, when you're patrolling around or walking, like that, go into those bathrooms, make sure, because it can also be like medical things, like someone could have passed out or had a heart attack or something in there while they were there, and are just unattended because services started. But, go into those areas that are, common areas that everyone has access, but there's not a lot of eyes on them for privacy reasons, like the bathroom. Go into those, check the closets, make sure doors that are supposed to be locked are locked, and things like that. And if it's not, then look in there, make sure, it kind of goes to what you're saying. But that goes back to, what we said, even for small churches that have limited resources, like those, that's free. To have a volunteer that's willing to do that, that's free, and every church can do that, and enhance their safety.
And once they commit to that, then I would, just like you're saying, now it's time for training.
Yes.
Sign up for something, get involved in something to start developing those skills, because we want to eliminate that second part of the rules, right? The first one is call 911. The second part of that rule is don't do anything you've been, haven't been trained to do. Well, then let's start training.
Yes.
And that's why our training that we have, our certification program, it starts right off with basic patrol procedures. We talk about situational awareness. What does patrol look like? How do we be effective safety team members? Right off the bat, we cover that kind of stuff. And then we continue to build on that through all the training. So we're checking things off the list that you're not trained to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're about out of time. And I mean, we just scratched the surface, but for somebody who's, looking to get some more, maybe they don't have a trainer in their area, or they're just like, hey, they've listened to this and they're like, hey, yeah, Kris is a good guy, I'd like to link up with him. Like, how do they do that? What's your academy look like, if you can tell us briefly?
Yeah, so one of the things we learned early on is that on-site training is is not as effective, because somebody always misses training. And of course, we all know on-site training can be very expensive. So what we did is we took all our training online. And so people can go to our website, they can sign up for our certification program, and they can start watching videos. Now, these are not the boring videos a lot of your cop friends have watched. I had to suffer through that too. So they're very good videos. They're entertaining and very informative. And they prepare you, get it all done. You take the test, you get certified with us. And so really, if they want to check that out, if they go to sheepdogchurchsecurity.com, that'll take them to our school site, and they can look at everything we have there.
Well, and I like that too, because like what I tell folks, that I've worked with, it's like, hey, when you're building this team, you need to think about what this team's going to look like 5 years down the road, because the people you start out with, most of them aren't going to still be on the team. Given a long, you're going to have new people come on, and just having that continuity and a legacy program so that everyone's been trained the right way and everyone's also on the same sheet of music, as we say tirelessly in the Army, right? But and so a program like yours gets that done, right? Because everyone gets the same training, everyone can talk about it, and there's that continuity that as members, some cycle out and new members come on, they're going to get the same kind of training. So I think that's the value for sure in going through an academy like yours. So we're going to give us the link one more time, but I'll make sure I put that in the show notes.
Yeah. So if they go to Sheepdog Church Security, all one word.com, that'll direct them right to our school page, and they could check out. There's all kinds of stuff in there, articles, never ending. Just check it out. If I tried to list everything, we'd be here for another hour.
Awesome. Well, Kris, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Would love to have you back because there's so many topics that I wish we would have had time to get into, but maybe we can do those another time. But I really appreciate you coming in. And guys, that's all we have today. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you check out Kris's work and his sheepdog training, his academy. It's going to be worth your time, especially if you're looking to beef up your security. Even if you've got a security team up and you want to make sure it's observing best practices and you're leveling up your expertise, or if you're just starting out, Kris can help you. So anyway, Kris, thank you. And I'm Mark signing off, telling you to stay sharp and keep it Pearl Snap.